Welcome to Planetary Gig Talk, Tales of Music and Magic. I'm your host, Jefferson Glassy, Chief Spiritual Dude of the Planetary Gig Society, whose mission is making connections through music with the intention of bringing peace. And here today, we're in the Studio One Riverdale Annex. I'm really looking forward to talking with a fabulous singer, musician, and music teacher, Marianna Previtti. Hi, Marianna. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Jeff. How are you today?
I'm very good. I'm especially good since I'm here talking with you. And, we met, I guess, through the Goddess of Awesomeness, Tara Gorman. And I think it was actually my 60th birthday when we got the Transposable Souls band together and had quite a hootenanny. That was a lot of fun.
It sure was. That was a blast.
That was a lot of fun getting together and doing that. I'd never done anything like that before. It was great to have you all supporting that.
I still think of some of those songs, where they just kind of go through my head. Jesus on the Main Line is one. Those harmonies that Mina and Patty and Tara and I created on that it was just so beautiful.
It was so much fun. It was great. Maybe we'll have to get the Transposable Souls band back together again.
Well, Patty has been dying to have some female harmony and just kind of feel that feeling of harmony, It's kind of an interesting term, isn't it, harmony? Because, it means something musically and then it means something in a larger sense, but I think the two are very connected.
That sounds absolutely correct to me. And female harmony is something I can sort of aspire to hearing or listening to as well. I'm curious as to when do you first remember music in your life? Is it with you, 5 or 10? Was there music in your house?
Mm-hmm. Some
people's parents played music and some people had no music at all around the house, and it's interesting. But what do you remember sort of the first thing about music in your life?
No, I remember very, very young knowing that I was going to be a singer.
Wow.
Knowing.
How young?
Maybe 4, maybe 3 or 4. Because I knew that I heard all of these things and I was like, I can do what they're doing. And I would spin 45s, and my family was very musical, very artistic. My mother was a real artist, and in her family there were artists and performers, and she was a cellist and a pianist, and we have a great uncle who was a vaudeville performer. Smiling Jack Walsh was his name. So, and my Uncle Jack was also an amazing performer, and my Uncle Bob was a jazz lover in Boston and cataloged a lot of the jazz events, and was also a great artist and would do little almost like baseball cards. He actually did draw some baseball cards.
Wow.
And he would draw these cartoons of like Vic Spiderbeck and some of the Boston, I guess you might even call them Dixieland jazz musicians, although at the time it wasn't actually called Dixieland. So it's just been in the family, kind of
it was all around you.
Artistic sensibility. My father was a physicist, and he actually was a monk before he married my mom.
Wow, that's pretty deep.
It is very deep. My parents are very deep people. They were extraordinary people,
So, but when you were 4 or 5, you had a feeling you wanted to be a singer. What kind of music do you remember hearing about at about that time? Was it in the house or
it was in the house?
Records
it was
or
absolutely
TV?
In the house because I have older sisters, so I'm the 5th of 5 girls, and then I have a little brother. But I don't. At this time, probably my little brother hadn't even been born yet, and we were listening to lots of the Supremes and the Marvelettes, and that's my 2 oldest sisters. And then the third sister was buying, stuff like, Pink Floyd, and then my second oldest sister had an 8-track that she brought home from school, from university one summer, and I remember I ate it up. And I was in second grade at that point, and that had like C Train and Dave Bromberg and Traffic.
Oh, Traffic. Right.
The Low Spark of High Heeled Boys. Oh, and Yes.
My God, my kids grew up to that.
Yeah. So that, and Yes kind of took me to this different place. It just transcended. I thought I was in the stars. I literally would put the headphones on and just go into the stars. And I was young.
I remember having the same feeling. Yeah. I'm a little older than you. I was in college, just sitting there and thinking, wow, how are they doing this?
I know, it was crazy, wasn't it?
So then did you take lessons, or did you just start singing at school, or how did that transpire?
The first thing that happened was, I think, probably my mother noticed some musical talent, and pretty much every one of the girls studied piano. But because of my hand, and those who are listening out there in the world, I have a non-formed right hand, a congenital deformity. I never studied piano. So when I got to school, and I was one of the first people to go through the public schools. My older sisters went to Catholic schools. But when I went through the schools, there was an opportunity to study an instrument. And I played the trumpet, or my mother suggested that I play the trumpet. She said, Marianna, I'm pretty sure that if you use your left hand, you can finger the valves of a trumpet. And that was the end of that. I mean, I just took off. And that's, trumpet was my major in college.
Wow,
it wasn't singing.
Didn't know that.
So all of my pedagogy comes through trumpet playing. And I still play the occasional church gig. And I wish I had more time to study. But at this point, my life is just nutty. I'm just crazy busy.
I know. You went to St. Mary's College?
I did, but I started out, though, at the University of Maryland because my trumpet professor was there. I had begun to study with him when I was 16, and I just kind of continued on, even though it was kind of a heartbreaking time for me because I really wanted to kind of break out at that point, and I wasn't sure what. I was young, and I think when you're young and you've got that kind of combination of, as we were talking about, I don't want to even call it talent because it's more like interest, and I was into it, and I played all the time, and I was also singing, and so I just knew that there was something on the horizon for me. This is what I felt. And so but my teacher convinced my parents, and of course my parents were frugal. I mean, they had 6 kids, and so, I wasn't really encouraged to go to maybe some place that would have been a little bit more, I don't know, suited to what I wanted. So I went to I continued to study at the University of Maryland my freshman year with my trumpet professor. And it just got more closed in and more closed in. And at the time I was playing with a band, Crazy Fingers. A lot of those people are
What kind of music was that?
It was Little Feat, Grateful Dead kind of stuff, and I was playing my trumpet mostly. And so I was about 18, and some of these people are still around, like Chris Marsh. Tom Erickson wasn't in the band, but he was sort of a part of that whole crowd. So we would go to different colleges and just, do these one-night stands on the weekends. And, I'd sit on a milk crate in the middle of a VW bus and just sit there. Of course, I can't imagine doing that now, but It was just so much fun. And we'd go through all these backcountry roads, and we'd play these different places. And I was like, this is incredible. I love this life. So anyway, and then we went to St. Mary's College and played a gig at St. Mary's. And I mean, it was just like heaven. These, people were just so interesting, and I had such a great time. And then I come to find out that St. Mary's College was a public school. And so I convinced my father, because at the time, Maryland cost $700 for a full-time load, and St. Mary's cost $750. So I said, Dad, it's only $50 more to have a full-time load at St. Mary's. So can I go there? And my dad was very accommodating to me, and he was very sweet. And of course, he said yes. And so, hence began my world of St. Mary's, which was a hugely enlightening time for me. I mean, I've met all my very, 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 very close friends that I love very much, and we experimented with stuff and music, and we do these funky jam parties and play all these different instruments that weren't really instruments at all. They were, cans of beans, and it was so much fun. They were just such alive people, and I still get together with them when I can. So yes, I graduated from St. Mary's, but I didn't start there. Yeah. And then I, eventually got my graduate degree from Maryland too, but that was a long time after.
Yeah, well, St. Mary's, I've spent some time down there. It's a beautiful place. So you've been in bands forever.
I have been.
All different kinds.
All different kinds. I mean, I think my mother would sing me jazz standards. She loved intervals and chord changes that were a part of jazz standards. And so my sensibility always was sort of drawn towards jazz. And in some ways, in other ways, I was a pop monger. I would listen to pop radio constantly, and I still do. I mean, people think that they've grown out of pop radio. I love pop radio. I'm constantly listening to it. I was just listening to an Elton John song the other day. The other hour, a couple hours ago. And it's just the most beautiful song. So there's a lot you can glean from pop, and I did. I was just eating it up. So, yeah.
So with all these, obviously music has been a strong thread and part of your life, and so you've worked with a lot of musicians. Any thoughts about how music affects them in their lives, and what you see? Does it have impacts on people? And I ultimately want to ask you about the music teaching as well, and with kids in particular, but just sort of having been in bands, I mean, why do people do it? Just do it because they love it, right? They get out and they play with people because they want to perform and share music.
Yeah, and my master's thesis was about the idea of what it means to listen. And I think that a real listener becomes the best of the musician. I mean, you can't just be this performer without being able to take in. So I think it's just that, we were talking about listening to yes, that idea when your perception is so heightened, and when you have that experience of that heightened perception, you're going to want more of it. So what do I think the musicians have, or how are they different possibly, and what makes them the way they are? I think it's just that experience of perceiving and then being able to kind of either imitate or add to your own part of that musical conversation. But I just, and this is with teaching too, I think that listening, and listening in the truest sense of the word, perceiving, is really a big part of it. You got to be able to be still in order to get into it, because otherwise you're going to miss that little cool thing that person did. Did you hear that? And if you ever sat down, especially when you were young and you had oodles of time, I was like, oh, did you hear that? Did you hear the way that he did that? Wasn't that fun? You just eat that kind of stuff up. It's just great.
Yeah, and the very first podcast interview that I did was with Eric Weinberg, who's teaching me guitar right now, and he said one of his teachers told him music is 80% listening. And Eric said, I think that's low.
I agree.
And it is something to be learned, as I've been, really working on guitar recently. I'm just trying to get the right chord. I'm just trying not to mess up. And it's sort of hard to take your awareness and your consciousness to listen more to what other people are doing. Obviously you want to stay in time and that sort of thing, but it's almost something you have to be deliberate about.
Yeah, you have to cultivate it. I think especially in this day and age, because we're not in the era of being listeners. I mean, I think that we take stuff in, but everything is our attention is divided.
When did you decide to be a music teacher? Why did you decide that? And who do you teach now? Who have you taught? And just sort of a, factual background a little bit to get a perspective on that.
Well, I mean, it was kind of, I knew that I wanted to major in music, and I thought it was probably be a lot more practical to major in music education as opposed to music performance. So I think there was it kind of goes back to sort of the bittersweetness of feeling like I could just be launched and there was no hurdles. I felt like I needed to have some safety net. I know that I'm a good teacher, and I know that I'm good with kids, and I was babysitting from the time I was, in middle school, and I always been a kid person. But having said that, probably if I could have just been the performer as opposed to the music teacher, I probably would have been. Even though there's a huge amount of joy in teaching, it's a different kind of work, So I majored in music education, and I didn't have unlimited funds, so I needed to work. And so I began working as an elementary school teacher. I was really good at it. I've gotten teacher of the year in my school.
Nice.
And I'm into it. I'm into the inspired part of it. I'm into the fun of it. But over the years, and I've been teaching for 26 years now, and I've always pretty much stayed in elementary school, but I've taught both instrumental and in general. General meaning that you kind of turn on kids to the elements of music, beat, rhythm. That's how I got into it, and I'm looking forward to being a little bit more unencumbered. And when if anyone knows me, knows that I can retire in 3.5 years, and when I do, it's not that I don't want to have connections with children, but I want to not necessarily be so beholden to the system.
Yeah, I hear you on that.
That's pretty much the deal there.
So, teaching children, being a teacher, I think, is one of life's highest callings. And our economic system, doesn't value teachers and musicians as much as Wall Street bankers and lawyers and all that. I mean, we just know that that's the way it is. But so, in teaching kids, hundreds or thousands of kids over the last quarter century, I mean, what do you see when they come into the classroom and sit down and, some kids, I assume, really know what they want to do, and other kids are kind of like, oh my God, what am I doing here? And but it strikes me it's probably pretty natural to everybody, right?
Well, not necessarily. There are some kids, like there was a kid the other day who I've known is just not into it. And he's a sweet little boy. He's a second grader. But you can just tell that it just, everything about it. And it's unlikely, or it's not super common, because he's only one of, I don't know how many kids are in the class, maybe 17. And he just, I asked him to do something. We were writing something on the board. We were writing So and Me in Law. And So and Me are sort of copycats on the staff and Law is a non-copycat, and that's how I approach it. And then afterwards they sing the So and Me's and the Laws, and they're able to see it. So it's an approach where you try to get them musically literate. A lot, which so he just didn't want to do it, and I said, you can do this. You can really do it. And I feel like sometimes music is just too much for people. You know, it's like,
almost scary.
It was almost scary, and even though it was just writing something down, I think that, you know, the process of going through the song, and it was just a little too touchy-feely for him. He didn't want to do that right now. And you know what? And anyway, I very quietly asked him to come up, and he did what he was supposed to do. But I was kind of surprised that he shut down, and I realized that this was a little bit too sensitive for him.
I mean, they say that music is helpful for doing math, for diligence. I mean, there's a lot of things, and that it's very natural to most people. So if you're taught it at an early age, I mean, what would you say that kids get out of the music training? What have you sort of seen?
Music does help to stimulate a part of your brain, and you know, if you learn your rhythms, and if you're able to learn steady beats, and if you're able to match pitch, I think it certainly turns on a part of your brain, and I'm not even sure what that part is. But I do have to mention this caveat. I think that children nowadays, they're worked to death, Jeff. And because they're worked to death, you know, they come in there and they just want to break. They don't want to divide rhythms, and I don't really blame them sometimes. And our curriculum has gotten so stringent that by 5th grade, I'm to teach them what a 1 chord is and a 4 chord, and so they need to know their changes. They need to know what key they're in. They need to be able to compose a song. I mean, that's a lot. And that's a lot to squeeze into a day. And it's a lot to squeeze into a day where kids' parents come from different places, are you know, that they're just trying to do the basics.
It does take a lot. They've got math. They've got other things that they have to do. And here's another thing. It's almost not like
it's not like a nice break. It's not like a nice break, you know. So, because, you know, we have to legitimize everything nowadays. You know, everything has to be legitimized, and the way you legitimize music is you get more curriculum oriented and more structured about the curriculum. I see the benefits of that, but I also think about, is it Finland where they get to play 3 hours a day? I mean, I think that that's where true creativity comes from. And when they play, they can sing a nursery rhyme, and, you know, and so get interested, fall in love with yourself, have fun, and that fun will bring you somewhere. Now, I'm not saying I love the technical part of music, and I love teaching that stuff, and I love then eating it up. But I also, my heart breaks a little bit, because my curriculum is so full, chock-loaded of stuff, and I don't even do half of what I'm supposed to do. You know, I see, so I have this big Promethean board, as it's called, a smart board. It's really fun, you know. You can write on it with your finger, and you can change colors, and you know, it's made to help kids be more a part of the educational experience. But a lot of times kids aren't looking at the Promethean board. They're like looking down. It's like, just let me have a little bit more time to myself, you know. So what do I feel that they get from music? Well, I mean, what does anyone get from art? I think it's they need art in their lives. They need, and when I say art, I mean they need the part of life that's unstructured, you know. Having said that, when they're in the schoolroom and when they're there, I think it's really important to have them be able to be silent for a little bit. I think we've talked a lot about in education nowadays about doing. And I think that there needs to be more silence. And I think that within the silence, they can find their own voice. So I try to get them to chill out a lot. I've done a lot of meditation too. I've done some Hindu mantra meditation for many years. And although I don't really actually utter Hindu mantras in my class, but I have them breathing deeply in through their nose and out through their mouths. And it's like a different classroom when they do that.
Well, it goes back a little bit to the point about music, so much of it being listening, but listening to the silence is also listening, I guess. I guess part of the music education for kids is just instilling that appreciation for...
Yeah, I know one of my teachers said that, I remember, and he was my elementary school teacher, and he said, my job is to make them love it, not to specifically educate them, not, the P and the Q of it all, but just have them fall in love. I mean, it's sort of like the same thing we were talking about before. What is talent? We talked about, this is previous to the interview, but we were talking about what talent is, and I think sometimes talent is just being interested, just so interested in something that you keep wanting to do it.
Right. And you have the intention to...
And you have the intention.
To keep it going. You must find some kids who are just gobsmacked and just take off and they never look back. I mean, kind of like you did with music. Do you see kids who have that?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more rare than you might think. I mean, there are talent. I guess if you were going to go into like degradations of it, there are kids that are really proficient at it and enjoy it. There might be kids that don't really get it, and then there are kids that are, those few kids that are you just know that that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
They might come along maybe once every 2 or 3 years.
Interesting.
That kind of like focus, intense focus on it. But on the other hand, Jeff, it doesn't mean that those people that are intensely focused on music when they're young are the ones that are going to be the musicians of it. Because that's what always surprised me, because at the time I was a very talented kid, as they say, talented. And, what I was told by all my teachers, I'm the most talented kid I've ever taught, blah, blah, blah. But there are a lot of people that are better players than me that put their mind to it and are better interpreters of the music for whatever it's worth, So I think, and isn't that cool? Because what that really means is that you can become the steerer of your own ship, I mean, it's like even with athletics, that one person who wasn't that good in athletics all through high school and all of a sudden is like this super jock, Same thing.
Well, it's very interesting talking about the perspective you have as a music teacher, and I really appreciate it. I wonder, since you are a teacher and we're about to, I guess, wrap up class in a sense, any further thoughts or maybe like homework for the listeners to think about, or things to, take away from the conversation that, may help us all a little bit figuring out, life and music and what we can do and all that.
Well, if you can stand it, which it's difficult to do. I mean, even this morning I was just trying to be still, and so many thoughts were going through my head. I would say try to be silent as much as you can, and silence doesn't have to be clenched, Silence, it has breathing to it. It has air to it. It has its own life. So if you can be silent, then I think there's so much more. It's like what one of my spiritual teachers said to me, the more you give up, you get so much more. So if you can try to be a little bit of an empty vessel, then all of that can fill up with something. So silent listening, and if something catches your ear when you're in that silence place, then go for it and have fun.
Wow, that sounds great. That's some real words of wisdom there. So really appreciate the time that you've taken to talk with us. Really appreciate it. Marianna Previtti, thanks very much.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Jeff.
You've been listening to Planetary Gig Talk, Tales of Music and Magic. I'm your host, Jefferson Glassy, Chief Spiritual Dude of the Planetary Gig Society. We talk with musicians and others about the power of music and how we can use music to help create a better world. Please check out our website, www.planetarygigs.org, for information about some of the organizations promoting music and musicians, resources about the power of music, books, movies, articles, including new research on music and the brain. We welcome your support. The Planetary Gig Society is a Section 501c3 charitable organization, and you can donate on the website. You also can receive a free email signature block demonstrating your support for Planetary Gig Society. Please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Planetary Gigs. And we want to thank fabulous musician and teacher Eric Weinberg of Little Eric Studios for the Planetary Gig Talk music titled Chill Kid, It's Saul. So please check out Planetary Gig Talk on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. Subscribe and hear all the upcoming episodes. Thanks very much.